USS Missouri, the battleship that ended one war and fought another. September 2nd, 1945. Tokyo Bay, Japan. A massive battleship sits at anchor, her 16-inch gun silent. On her deck, beneath the shadow of her massive superstructure, representatives from the Empire of Japan are about to sign the instrument of surrender that will end World War II. The battleship is USS Missouri, BB-63, the Mighty Mo. But here's what most people don't know. This wasn't the end of Missouri's story. It was just the beginning. This ship would serve in 3 different wars across 5 decades. She would be decommissioned, recommissioned, modernized with weapons from the future, and would fire her guns in anger one last time during a conflict that seemed impossible when she was first launched. Today, we're telling the complete story of USS Missouri, from her construction during the darkest days of World War II to her final combat missions in 1991, and the remarkable reason she's still afloat today. Hit subscribe, because this is the story of America's last battleship, and it's absolutely incredible. Birth of a battleship. Let's go back to 1940. World War II is raging in Europe. Japan is expanding aggressively across Asia. The United States isn't in the war yet, but everyone knows it's coming. And the Navy is desperately building ships. USS Missouri was laid down at the Brooklyn Navy Yard on January 6, 1941, 11 months before Pearl Harbor. She was the 3rd Iowa-class battleship to be constructed, following her sisters Iowa and New Jersey. The Iowa-class battleships were designed with a specific mission: hunt down and destroy Japanese battleships in the Pacific. They needed to be fast enough to catch anything they couldn't outfight, and powerful enough to destroy anything they couldn't outrun. Missouri was 887 feet long, nearly 3 football fields. She displaced 45,000 tons empty and over 58,000 tons fully loaded. Her main battery consisted of 9 16-inch guns arranged in 3 triple turrets. Each shell weighed 2,700 pounds, more than a car, and could be fired 23 miles with devastating accuracy. But speed was just as important as firepower. Missouri's 8 boilers and 4 steam turbines could generate 212,000 horsepower, pushing her to 33 knots, about 38 miles per hour. That doesn't sound fast until you remember this is a 58,000-ton warship cutting through the ocean. She was launched on January 29, 1944, sponsored by Margaret Truman, daughter of then-Senator Harry Truman of Missouri. The ship was named after Truman's home state, and that connection would prove historically significant. Missouri was commissioned on June 11, 1944, just 5 days after D-Day in Europe. The war in the Pacific was reaching its climax, and the Navy needed every battleship it could get. Combat in the Pacific Missouri arrived in the Pacific Theater in January 1945, joining the Fast Carrier Task Force as it closed in on Japan. Her primary mission wasn't to engage enemy battleships. By this point, the Japanese fleet was largely destroyed. Instead, Missouri served as an anti-aircraft platform, protecting aircraft carriers and providing shore bombardment for amphibious invasions. Her first major action was the Battle of Iwo Jima in February 1945. Missouri's 16-inch guns pounded Japanese positions on the island, firing hundreds of tons of high-explosive shells to support the Marines fighting ashore. The bombardment was so intense that the ship's guns became hot enough to glow. In March, Missouri participated in the Okinawa campaign. This is where things got dangerous. On April 11, 1945, Missouri was struck by a Japanese kamikaze aircraft. The Zero fighter crashed into the ship's starboard side, just below the main deck. The impact was tremendous, but the ship's armor held. The plane's engine and parts of the fuselage penetrated the hull, but there was no significant damage to the ship's fighting capability. Here's the remarkable part. Captain William Callahan ordered that the remains of the Japanese pilot be buried at sea with full military honors. In the middle of a brutal war, with kamikaze attacks killing American sailors every day, Callahan insisted on treating the enemy pilot with dignity and respect. The crew conducted a formal ceremony, complete with the firing of 3 volleys and the playing of taps. Missouri continued operations, bombarding targets on the Japanese home islands through the summer of 1945. Her guns fired on industrial facilities, military installations, and coastal defenses. She was part of the final naval bombardment of Japan before the atomic bombs were dropped. And then came the moment that would define her place in history: the surrender deck, August 1945. The atomic bombs have been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan has agreed to surrender. The question is, where should the formal ceremony take place? General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, chose USS Missouri. There were several reasons for this decision. Missouri was one of the newest and most powerful battleships in the fleet, a symbol of American might. She was named after President Truman's home state, and Truman had just made the decision to use atomic weapons. And perhaps most importantly, she had the deck space to accommodate all the representatives, media, and ceremony required for such a historic moment. On September 2nd, 1945, Missouri sat at anchor in Tokyo Bay, surrounded by hundreds of Allied warships. On her deck, a simple table was set up. The Japanese delegation, led by Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, came aboard. At 9:02 a.m., General MacArthur stepped to the microphone and delivered one of the most famous speeches in military history. "We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored." The Japanese representatives signed first. Then, MacArthur signed as Supreme Commander. Admiral Chester Nimitz signed on behalf of the United States. Representatives from the United Kingdom, Soviet Union, China, France, and other allied nations followed. The ceremony lasted 23 minutes. When it was over, World War II was officially ended. But here's what makes this even more incredible. The American flag flying over Missouri during the ceremony was the exact same flag that had flown over the U.S. Capitol on December 7, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked. It was also the same flag that Commodore Matthew Perry had flown when he opened Japan to the West in 1853. The symbolism was intentional and powerful. The table where the surrender was signed is still on board Missouri today, preserved exactly as it was on that September morning. Korea and the first decommissioning. After the war, Missouri served as a training ship and goodwill ambassador. She carried the remains of the Turkish ambassador back to Turkey. She participated in naval exercises. But by 1950, the Navy was downsizing, and battleships seemed like relics of a bygone era. Then North Korea invaded South Korea in June 1950, and suddenly battleships were relevant again. Missouri was recommissioned and sent to Korea. Her mission was shore bombardment, using her massive 16-inch guns to support ground troops and destroy enemy positions inland. And she was devastatingly effective. During the Korean War, Missouri fired 2,895 rounds of 16-inch ammunition. Each shell could destroy a building, crater a roadway, or annihilate an enemy position from 23 miles away. She could deliver firepower equivalent to an entire squadron of bombers, with greater accuracy and without risking pilots. One of her most famous actions occurred in March 1952, when Missouri provided fire support for United Nations forces near Kojo. Her guns destroyed enemy bunkers, artillery positions, and supply depots. The North Koreans had no answer to this kind of precision bombardment from a ship they couldn't reach. Missouri served in Korean waters until the armistice was signed in 1953. She returned to the United States, continued training operations for a few more years, and was finally decommissioned in 1955. The Navy determined that battleships were too expensive to operate in peacetime, and missiles and aircraft carriers were the future. Missouri was placed in the mothball fleet at Bremerton, Washington. For the next 30 years, she sat silent and rusting, a monument to a bygone era of naval warfare. Most people assumed she would eventually be scrapped. But history had other plans. The 1980s. Rebirth 1980s. The Cold War is at its peak. President Ronald Reagan announces a plan to build a 600-ship Navy capable of challenging the Soviet Union anywhere in the world. And part of that plan involves something radical: bringing the Iowa-class battleships back to life. The idea seemed crazy. These ships were 40 years old. Technology had advanced enormously. Modern warships used gas turbines, guided missiles, and computer systems. How could you modernize a battleship designed in the 1930s? But the Navy saw advantages. The Iowa-class ships had armor that could withstand hits that would sink modern vessels. Their 16-inch guns could deliver firepower no other surface ship possessed. And their sheer size meant they could carry modern weapons systems that smaller ships couldn't accommodate. Missouri was towed to Long Beach Naval Shipyard in 1984 and began the most extensive modernization of her career. The work cost $475 million, roughly $1.4 billion in today's money. Here's what they added: 32 Tomahawk cruise missiles and armored box launchers. These missiles could strike targets 1,000 miles away with precision accuracy. 16 Harpoon anti-ship missiles for engaging enemy warships beyond visual range. 4 Phalanx CIWS close-in weapon system. Guns, radar-controlled Gatling guns that could shoot down incoming missiles and aircraft. Modern radar systems, electronic warfare equipment, and satellite communications. But they kept the main battery. Those 9 16-inch guns were still the most powerful naval artillery in the world, and nothing in the modern arsenal could replace them. Missouri was recommissioned on May 10, 1986, nearly 42 years after her original commissioning. She was now a hybrid, a World War II battleship equipped with weapons that wouldn't look out of place on a starship. Desert Storm, the final battle. January 1991. Iraq has invaded Kuwait. Operation Desert Storm is about to begin. And USS Missouri is going to war one last time. Missouri deployed to the Persian Gulf as part of the Naval Task Force supporting the liberation of Kuwait. Her mission was twofold: use her Tomahawk missiles to strike targets deep inside Iraq, and use her 16-inch guns to bombard Iraqi positions along the Kuwaiti coast. On January 17, 1991, the first night of the war, Missouri fired Tomahawk missiles at Iraqi targets. These missiles flew hundreds of miles, navigating by terrain-following radar, and struck command centers, communications facilities, and military installations with devastating accuracy. But the most dramatic moment came later, when Missouri used her main guns for the last time in combat. On February 6th, Missouri fired her 16-inch guns at Iraqi positions in southern Kuwait. The massive shells destroyed bunkers, artillery positions, and troop concentrations. Iraqi soldiers who survived the bombardment later said they had never experienced anything so terrifying. The sound of the shells passing overhead was like freight trains falling from the sky, and the explosions obliterated everything within hundreds of yards. Missouri fired a total of 783 rounds of 16-inch ammunition during Desert Storm. It was the last time in history that battleship guns were fired in anger. The battleship also survived an attack. On February 25th, an Iraqi Silkworm missile was fired at Missouri. The ship's defenses detected the missile, and the British destroyer HMS Gloucester shot it down with a Sea Dart missile. Missouri continued her mission unscathed. When the war ended, Missouri had proven that even a 50-year-old battleship still had a place in modern warfare. But it was also clear this was a swan song. The costs of operating battleships were too high, and modern weapon systems could accomplish the same missions more efficiently. Missouri was decommissioned for the final time on March 31, 1992, at Long Beach Naval Base. But the story doesn't end there. In 1998, Missouri was donated to the USS Missouri Preservation Association and towed to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. She was moored at Ford Island just 500 yards from the USS Arizona Memorial, the ship that represents the beginning of America's involvement in World War II, next to the ship where that war ended. Today, USS Missouri is a museum ship, visited by thousands of people every year. You can walk her decks, stand where the surrender was signed, and see the kamikaze impact site. You can tour the interior, see the captain's cabin, and stand in the spots where history was made. The Mighty Mo served for 48 years across 3 wars. She carried millions of pounds of ammunition, traveled millions of miles, and was home to thousands of sailors. She witnessed the end of the greatest war in human history and fought in the last battleship engagement ever. If you found this incredible, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into military history, legendary ships, and the stories that shaped our world. I'll see you in the next one.